The Museum Roadshow is brought to you by 125 Apparel.
Well, I hope you get entertained with this because I'm going to show you a lot of pictures. And I think the people back there like pictures. Okay, this is in Morocco. And this happened, it just has been published in Nature and Science. And it's in Morocco. And if you look, this is what they have found in this Jebel Irhoud of Morocco. This is a place where there's a lot of layers of rock. Okay. And they put the date of 160,000 years, and these are fossils. They can't be radiocarbonated. And that's what Nimue is. And you see that 160,000 years ago, and they want to stretch it back to 300,000. But this is what the composite was. They found 5 human skeletons. And if you notice, they've looked at the brain, the cranium area capacity. And it's unusual. They think that the brain is quite different than our brain. And you notice it sort of peeks out in the back here. This is the occipital lobe. And I venture that the people back in that time had much better visual acuity because the occipital lobe was more developed. You notice they have a large jaw and very prominent teeth. That's just like Nimue. In Minnesota, in 1858, when it became a state, this was a virgin state. And a lot of geologists and archaeologists, anthropologists came to this virgin state because they said, we think that early man lived here, that Indians weren't the only people that lived here. So from 1848 to 1931, 73 years, they never found anything, which is odd. Now, if you notice, where we live, the land we walk on, is where Nimue walked on. And this area in here was the Itasca moraine. This one here was the Alexandria moraine. And this was all glacier, all of this part here. And there was a man, I call him the father of geology, Frank Leverett, that walked all that land and sampled all the land, and he described this glacier. The glacier, if you look down at the roundabout and you look at how they dipped out from the apartment and the Marriott, you look at all that, you see just silt. That silt is about 1/16 millimeter in diameter. It's very, very small. This glacier that ground this whole area and then sent out a lobe down this area here, all the way to Des Moines, was Glacier Lake Pelican. And when Jenks got involved in looking at Nimue, he said that this glacier should be called Leverett Glacier. Well, when he met Frank Leverett, he said, no, let's call it Glacier Lake Pelican. And if you look at the glaciologists, you ask them, oh, we don't know about this one, but we know about where it was with Glacier Lake Agassiz. Lake Agassiz was a child compared to Glacier Lake Pelican. Glacier Lake Pelican was here 2,000 years before Glacier Lake Agassiz, and Agassiz was filled with the water from Glacier Lake Pelican. So one thing down along this area, and if you've ever been to Inspiration Peak in the park, down this area, along this Alexandria moraine, I have an imagination, and I'm like Einstein. I believe imaginations are real. And I see this when I drive down 94, I see this U-shaped valley, which was here in where Inspiration Peak is. They talk about the microfauna and the microflora that was there 25,000 years ago. That was before Lake Pelican literally started really melting. Well, I think it formed this, like it is in the Arctic, a U-shaped valley, and it was lush with plants, animals, and west of here was the prairie, and there was 3 different types of bison, which were much larger than the bison we see today. And all this valley was filled with small horses, the size of German shepherds. Now, as I say, in 1858, when the geologists came, they couldn't find anything around here. They did find a few mammoth bones, but that was about it. And lots and lots of arrows and things of the Native Americans. But all these brown spots here are things to dig up and find. It's all predicted that there's lots of archaeological digs yet to be left here. But you'll have to go deep because of the glacier. It filled over things like Nibelung. Now, in 1937, they had a meeting here. This is the building of Natural Resources in Philadelphia. It's on the campus of Drexel University. And in this building, there were some very interesting people that put on a symposium, an international symposium about early man. They invited 3,500 scientists from all around the world, and the scientists brought and presented over a 3-day period from March the 17th to the 20th of 1937. They talked about early man. Well, at this meeting, they had invited a fellow by the name of Alois Herlitzka. And he was living remotely in Alaska. And they called him and said, please come here. Now, Dr. Herlitzka was a guy that was a head of the Smithsonian Institute back in 1931 through about 1937. He was a guy that had a lot of knowledge, and he produced a lot of publication, and he classified all human beings in like 4 different groups. And he had a belief, and the people, a lot of the science here knew about Herlitzka because he dominated the publication field. He personally looked at the papers and he threw them out if they compared a human skull with the geology of the area. He was totally against looking at the geology of the area. He wanted to look strictly at the skulls. He also thought in terms that human beings went back in age and then fell off the cliff to the Neanderthal man, which had a smaller brain, was not as adept in solving problems, and so he thought that human beings were maybe back a little over 3,000 years ago. He dominated the field, but like the Chinese, well, they said, well, we're finding these skulls that are older than that. And so over the 3 days, these, whatever was there, the scientists, they grumbled and grumbled and grumbled. Well, why did they grumble? Because Minnesota Man was there. Minnesota Man was there drawn by this Dr. McNett, who took the photographs of Jenks's photographs of the bones and compared them dimensionally and formed an individual that was 5'2", had the knife, the turtle carapace, had a satchel on her that contained bone tools, and she had a clamshell necklace, and she on her side she had the whelk shell. This they were looking at on 1937, March 17th to the 20th. When it came, Dr. Herlitzka got in a lot of arguments with his buddy Holmes and his buddy Ernst Ansted from Sweden. They totally believed in what Herlitzka said. this is not a possibility this individual couldn't be older than, 3,000 or so years. Well, it got such a heated debate that they had roundtable discussion for the next 2 days. And in those 2 days, they said, we want to go out there to see that burial site. We want to decide on what our age is, and we want to find out how she died. So, this part here is about the skeletons, and in the burial site, these are the bones they found. In addition, some were pilfered away, so we don't have quite all the bones. But when they came out to these two field conferences at the road, the burial site, they came in June and in August. And not all the scientists could come at one time, so they said, well, we have to have 2 conferences and then decide what the information is. Well, on the exhibit, you can see that they call her Miss United States, which is interesting. And so they came out here and they looked at the silt outside the burial site and inside the burial site, and they compared the age of the silts, and they decided that Nimue, or Minnesota Man at the time, she was as old as the silt, which is 20,000 years. And so they decided that in August. And in addition to that, they wanted to see how she died. Well, they decided she drowned. And that was because of the way she was positioned with her body. And also, they negated her falling into a crevice and then sealed it up. But she was under about 12 feet of silt. So she was buried very, very deep in the soil. And they said, well, it could have been by landslide. And they had all these different theories of how she was killed. But they finally came to the consensus, she drowned. Well, once they made that conclusion, the newspapers all around the world, their headlines said, Minnesota Man, 20,000 years old, or Minnesota woman, and I may have said that a few others. But so Sally and I have been collecting these papers, and we've had a lot of fun looking through. We got a stack of papers now. And literally every paper that we've seen had the headlines that she is 20,000 years old. So they negated Herscheliska terribly. I mean, he left in disappointment. And so, but Anthus came to the 2 field conferences, and he was convinced that she was 20,000 years, which was really good. Well, these are the way the pieces of skeleton they found. And this is over 5 days. So here is the way she probably was positioned on the road. Now you see the bones are white and her head is dark. Her head had a lot of used motor oil on it. And so for at least 10 years she was on display in Minneapolis with the Minnesota History Center, and they called her Lady in the Lake, which is really interesting because this was before we got away from Minnesota Man. And America's first human skeleton of the glacial era. And she was, as I say, is on display for at least 10 years. But I think she was probably from 1937 until the end of the 50s.
The Museum Roadshow is brought to you by 125 Apparel.